Good afternoon, interwebs. Matt Carter, Carter's Commentaries. It's been a rough couple of weeks for me personally, work, home, just lots of stress. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been feeling that. And I love being on social media. I think a lot of us use it for great and wonderful purposes. We also like to express beyond just kind of the friendly and loving shares that we may do to keep people that we know, our family, friends, connected. Politically, we tend to throw things out there, and I'm certainly an advocate for that. But there's a trend I've noticed over the last, really since Memorial Day, and it stems from really underlying issues our nation has endured since its genesis and even preceding that. I get this vibe that's out there, and I know that we're biased. There's just no way around that. Humans are biased, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a neuroscience element. There's a climate and cultural element that goes with all that. And I'm no expert on any of that. I've studied criminal justice, even at the graduate level, so I'm very aware of the disparate representation that I think gets conflated into a perception that people within the criminal justice system have certain beliefs. And my experience as a law enforcement professional for now 28 years is I don't think that it's represented. It's a much more complex problem than can be tackled in a YouTube video. And crime is a societal problem. How we respond to crime is a societal problem. But we can certainly tie some really strong elements of what's going on right now to things that occurred certainly in the 60s and moving forward in response to some cultural shifts that were going on. Certainly Civil Rights Act in 64 to how the response to that, changes in positions of the Supreme Court, cases that said segregation, separate but equal was okay, to segregation is no longer permissible. And the theme I'm getting on social media is that everyone believes they're right, and I'm going to tell you what you should do as a result of that. So here's what I want to pare this down for whomever is stuck by this far. 3 minutes in, and I've really not covered the big piece. It's really rooted in something quite simple. Life and interactions of humanity are incredibly challenging because we come from different upbringings, different personal experiences. And there are things I cannot change. I'm at this stage 46 years in, and I have the experiences and the values that I have, and I cannot force them onto anybody else. And there's this weird, I think, expectation that I can, as representing as people on social media, I can make you do something different than you want to, based on shame, intimidation, a loud voice. And I have, despite using social media since first getting on in 2008, I have used it to share my views and opinions, but I have tried really hard to never say to other folks that this is what you should do. I want to share my view and expect that it will be respected, and try to respect others' views. I'm engaged in conversation. Sometimes it gets twisted off because we get emotional and personal, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't know that there's anything wrong with being personal, but I do know this. I know that I am only in control of me, and I answer to the good Lord Almighty. And I'm going to pare this down, I hope, in a way that folks find meaningful. There are over 300 million folks in the United States, and I can only control one of them. I hope that my behavior over the last 46 years, certainly believe that it's improved as I've gotten older, but that does not make me perfect. I'm a sinner. And I'm so thankful I have accepted that Jesus Christ is the salvation. And while I'm not here to maybe pitch, I'm not a preacher, I'm not a theologian. I love finding the simplicity of Jesus' time on earth and paring it down to when he was challenged by the Pharisees. For those so inclined, you can find it in the Gospel of Matthew in verse 22. I think the key verses these are a couple of my favorite, from 36 to 39. And the Pharisees, who were the educated, the righteous in the Jewish community, and Jesus was trying to change that dynamic. He pares it down to this when asked, what's the greatest law? Because for those unaware, it was really driven by following a bunch of rules. And I think sometimes life really is forced into, you just follow the rules and you're going to be okay. The reality is, following the rules is great and it makes us feel good, and we try to get other people to follow rules or the rules we think are important. But at its core, Jesus had this to say. When asked about the commandment and the law, what's the greatest? And his response is, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now I use this and I'll say it in a different way because I think it's a way we relate, but it's that golden rule. I mean, that's really what the good Lord is telling us. We have an obligation to treat others the way we want to be treated. And you're worth loving. You're worth prioritizing as an individual. And your values, your character, your content, and your worth as a human is as equal as anybody else in God's eyes. You are a child of God just like I am. And while we may think differently about policy or procedures or political scope or, hell, sports teams, which is one way I like to kind of engage this conversation, because it's not as sensitive when we start talking about sports teams. But our upbringing, our cultural experiences, all influence how we see the world. We filter through those lenses. We all have those biases that influence. And God willing, my biases don't become part of my action plan, meaning prejudicial. I just want to be an example as often as I can of God's love for me, in the hopes that others will experience it, and me being the vehicle. But I do know this: God does not need me to make that happen. God is going to use what is going on right now, as he has so many times before, in a way that matters for him. And I hope I get the discernment and the guidance from the good Lord for whatever folks see in me as maybe an example, whether it's as a friend, as a father, which is probably my most important role, and damn close to it is being a husband. But in my career path, I've spent 28 years doing something that is really being challenged right now. And if you think my content of character is quality enough to believe, I hope, well, we're not talking about you. We're not mad about you. What I want you to know is that I have shared lessons with my view of God's words in mind, that I am to love the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind, and that I am to love my neighbor as myself. And there's an implication there that I am worth loving, and that I have to prioritize loving myself is pretty important, because I have value as a child of God. And that is the way I hope this message can be interpreted and seen, is that you have value. Your neighbor, whomever and to whatever extension that is, brother and sister as a human being, deserves to be loved just like you do. Not only by yourself, but by God, and we are all God's children. And that I know God is going to use this. I have that faith, no matter how difficult things are today, how seemingly helpless some people interpret this, that God is going to use what is happening in our society today for his glory. And I hope that I am able to be a small part of that. I love you. God loves you. And be good to each other and take care of yourselves and each other.